Hey, Brian and Weston here for Between the Notes podcast. We're really looking forward to this episode tonight. We've got my good buddy, our good buddy, Jon Price. Just to tell you a little bit about him, Jon is a New York City-based operatic tenor and renowned voice teacher known for his performances in major lyric tenor roles and his crossover concerts spanning classical and musical theater. He serves on the voice faculty of Rider University and Marymount Manhattan College, leads a thriving private studio in Manhattan, right by Carnegie Hall, which I've been to. It's a beautiful studio, and is a respected pedagogue and presenter, as well as president of the Cuban Art Song Project organization, which we will get to a little bit later. But Jon, thank you so much. Welcome, buddy.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I mean, I've been following along as you guys have grown with the podcast and so many wonderful guests, and I'm just really thrilled that we're going to get to be here and have this conversation together in this format.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I got to tell you, I've been hearing about. I mean, we got to meet that day when we were all in New York, but as Brian was been talking all about you and your family for the last year while he's been teaching up at Westminster, and so it's great to finally get a chance to have a conversation. This is awesome.
Oh, back at you.
Yeah, we used to do this every Wednesday night while Jon was making some delicious dinner or another, and enjoying some wine, and it was great. We always just had wonderful conversation, different topics, talking about singing. Usually had to do about that, and so I'm grateful to have you today and to bring in Weston, because he and I again, talk so much about singing and teaching and technique and all these kinds of ideas. And so listen, before we get into the weeds of the technique stuff and all that jazz, which I really want to spend a nice amount. Tell us a little bit. I know you sang as a boy, as a boy soprano, and tell us how you got into singing and music and such.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Vienna, Virginia, which is sort of a suburb outside of Washington D.C. It's also where Wolf Trap is. For anybody who spent any time there. My dad is a pastor. He was one of the pastors at Vienna Baptist Church, which is an American Baptist church outside of D.C., and my mom is a classical singer and a voice teacher. When I was growing up, she had a private studio, at one point became the music director at the church, and then also sang in the chorus at Washington National Opera. And I think I just didn't want to be left out and had a desire to be in front of an audience whenever possible, and I figured out that I had a little bit of an inclination towards singing, and so as soon as I could, I started doing solos in church. And then the children's chorus at the Washington Opera had an audition, and I went in, and my first opera that I ever did with the Washington Opera was Pagliacci, starring Placido Domingo, directed by Franco Zeffirelli.
Amazing.
Oh, wow.
And with Zeffirelli in the room.
Sure.
And PBS was actually filming a documentary on the whole thing while I was there. So Zeffirelli literally sat in the back the entire time until the day the cameras came, and then the entire cast gathered on stage for this sort of inspirational speech from Franco Zeffirelli, who I had no idea who that was at the time, but I got the sense that things were very exciting. So it was definitely an exciting time. Got to go on and do one of the three spirits in Magic Flute there. Then got to do the Shepherd Boy in Tosca. And a little-known young artist, I believe at the time, sang the Jailer, a young guy by the name of Eric Owens.
Wow.
And cool. I remember thinking, wow, he's really good for that small a part. And and so I had that experience. Then, my voice changed, and I went on and did the first year that they had the high school program at Washington Opera, and I was with that kind of pre-young artist program thing. Went on and did my undergrad at CCM. So I went to Cincinnati, and I'd say I had kind of a little bit of a falling out with my voice, where I was going chugging along, having a lot of success, and I kind of reached the limit of what my talent would allow me to do without doing some additional work and figuring some additional things out. So I kind of reckoned with that for a few years, and some teaching that didn't quite put me on a road that was helpful for me, and I take as much responsibility for that as anybody. And
You're being so charitable here into talking about this. Like, I would be like, teacher didn't know what there is. No, I totally
no. I will say that I one of the things that's really motivated me as a teacher is thinking about, wanting to be, for the people who come into my world, in my orbit, the sort of teacher that I wish had been there at that time for me. Because there were some wonderful teachers, but I think they weren't, at least at that point, the teachers that I was working with, I think were not super interested in doing the kind of work that I needed to do at that point in terms of basic voice building. And I think that it wasn't until I, went back and actually took 2 years between undergrad and graduate school and worked for a year as a community organizer. I was, all over knocking on doors in Kentucky and Ohio, and then went to organizing school in Chicago for a couple weeks, and discovered that was not a great fit for me either. And then I sort of started getting back into my voice a little bit. I was taking lessons the whole time and sort of working professionally as a sort of professional chorister, and I started teaching a couple of voice lessons and using that to also help myself kind of learn more about my own voice. Ended up auditioning for the Boston Conservatory. A teacher who I had known in Kansas City, Rebecca Folsom, was on faculty there, and I thought, well, that's somebody who I know, who I think might be able to help me sort some things out. So I went to Boston, and I started on that journey there, and I had really tremendous growth for about a year, and then kind of hit another little roadblock and needed to sort some things out. But that's really when I started digging in and thinking, well, I don't think these things are going to sort themselves out on their own. And I think I really need to take some personal responsibility for figuring out my own voice. And I found that I really had a knack for thinking about things functionally and pedagogically. And in a kind of a happy, act of timing, my mom actually went back to school to get her PhD in voice pedagogy at the same time as I was getting my master's, and so prior to the timing was really excellent for me because I had all these questions, and she was kind of digging into some of these questions in the more sort of large framework pedagogical sense at that time. So we had many phone calls, sometimes with just me and her, sometimes with groups of friends as I would get together, and we'd be talking about the voice. We'd be getting into rooms and trying stuff out and kind of just playing in the sandbox. And really, that was the process, that and finding a teacher who really helped me kind of put some things together. That was really the process by which I really feel like I found my voice and discovered through that what I really loved was the process of figuring out the voice, and that was my favorite part of it.
And up until this point, everything was still in the operatic side of things, right? The classical music.
Totally. But I would say one thing that I learned through that process is that what really interested me was figuring out what the voice could do, figuring out what was standing between me or anyone else and a free released sound in kind of any context. So the music I was dealing with was classical, but I found that I had a lot more interest in the singing and a little less interest in the music. And I don't think I was as aware of that at the time. And of course, I loved the music, but mainly I was interested in the music as a vehicle for hearing singers.
Well, and one of the great things about this Between the Notes podcast is that, I've been able to introduce some of my colleagues and friends to Brian that for whatever reason their paths hadn't crossed yet. And so, like we said, I'm so glad that you're on here because while I feel like I know you pretty well through Brian, I had no idea that you had this whole history in operatic singing. Mm-hmm. I had only heard the stories and known you as a musical theater teacher and a musical theater, enthusiast. So my question is when did you start to really gain that interest in musical theater while you were pursuing all of this pedagogy and within that opera community,
Yeah, and I continued on and singing classically through the whole thing, and even up to I was in Croatia 2 summers ago singing a Don Jose over there, but it's but it's definitely my focus has been, squarely on musical theater and all of my teaching and in a lot of my singing for the last, good bit of my career. But I would say the shift really happened. I mean, I grew up doing musicals. I grew up doing not just high school musicals, but also in the community. But really, when I was graduating from with my performance diploma from Boston Conservatory, I was like, what am I going to do next? And I was looking for, you all ask a lot of times, right? What's next? And I didn't know. But I found that I really enjoyed teaching, and that the people that seemed to be coming to me who needed some help and didn't know where to go were people who were in commercial and musical theater singing worlds who just were having a hard time finding a technician. And I didn't have a really deep knowledge at that point in commercial music pedagogy or all the different styles within musical theater, but I had pretty good ears, and because I was used to people, I think, mishearing what was going on with my own voice, and I figured out what it was mishearing after a lot of trial and error. I feel like I maybe had a different, more nuanced perspective than a lot of the people who were listening to those singers, and so I was giving them insight that they weren't getting from their other sources. So I developed a pretty big private studio, primarily of musical theater and commercial singers, a lot of whom were having professional careers while I was still in school. And then I saw that Rider University had an opening for an adjunct, voice professor in the musical theater division. And I was like, well, if I can't figure anything else out, I think I'd like to teach, and that would get me into like the ballpark of New York and kind of give me some means to move down there and kind of let me set up home base. And so I applied and was told that they wouldn't know if they needed anybody until enrollment numbers finalized. So they were kicking it down. Yeah, right? kicking it down. And then in August, where the semester started like the very beginning of September, I finally had an interview and was hired and moved myself down to New Jersey and started teaching at Rider University when I was, in my mid-20s, and didn't really know much of anything about the repertoire, but had I think a really good set of ears and a very, very motivated outlook. So I was ready to work.
And I think this is a good time to sidebar that Rider University and Westminster Choir College is the linchpin for you and for me and for your mom, the wonderful Dr. Kathy Price, who has been a mentor to me and a second mom, honestly. And John's like my brother in those years that I lived in New Jersey. And but anyway, I just want to kind of plug, if we could, the MVP program. Weston and I had a conversation about some pedagogy ideas. And what's too much to know? What's not enough to know? Is it what kind of what's the singer? What's the personality of the singer that you have in front of you right now? Is if you give them too much information, is it going to tie them in knots? Or is it the kind of singer that, like me, for instance, I'm the kind of singer, if I feel like there's something I don't know, it becomes a chink in my armor, and I'm like, that insecurity will grow if I'm, oh, well, I'm having trouble singing high and soft, or I'm not able to do this, or I know that I'm doing this, or my top isn't working. Yeah, whatever it is. And so when I was going through COVID and everything else, that's when I decided to go back and get this MVP degree, which is all online. It's a wonderful program, and you do everything from voice science and French melody and German lead and literature courses. And one of the great courses that's on my mind, because Irini's taking it right now, is vocal methods, which is talking all about this pedagogy and the way to teach singing and what's the most effective way to do that. But anyway, good shout out for MVP program at Westminster. Oh, and VPI too, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And
go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I was just going to say MVP, standing for Masters of Vocal Pedagogy.
Thank you. That's right.
And what was the other anagram you threw out?
VP.
Is that the right word? Anagram?
John?
Acronym?
Acronym. That's the one.
Acronym. I don't know. Whatever.
Anagram is when it goes backwards or something? I don't know.
I don't know. Anyway. VPI stands for what?
Voice Pedagogy Institute. So it's the Westminster Voice Pedagogy Institute. So Yeah, and I'll also put a plug that the Master of Voice Pedagogy program has a classical track and a musical theater track, so you can go
right.
in either
Nice.
door depending on what is going to be the best fit for you. And it's a really amazing program that gives you a really deep dive into all things pedagogical, but it's really designed for somebody who's already out in the world, doing either teaching in a full-time way or transitioning from a performing career into wanting to teach. So it's a great thing.
Yeah, and I can say Irini and I have done it, I think together we've done it 2 or 3, definitely 2, but probably 3 times. And it's a lot. I mean, it's a long day, but it's fun. It's so fun. You guys do such a great job of bouncing back and forth between topics, but giving enough time to, like you said, do a deep dive. But then when you've been like thinking really analytically about either acoustics or the voice science and all the that kind of stuff, then we go to like yoga, like yoga singing and stuff, where it's like, okay, now you can let your mind rest and reset. It's just, it's so beautiful and so impressive the way you guys have put this together.
Oh, thanks, man.
I just would really encourage anybody who's interested to audit it, and or if you need credits, you can take it for credit at your university, and that could be like, there's all kind of ways. We'll put the link for VPI in there, but I think it's a good time to pivot over to some of the differences between the technique of classical versus musical theater, and what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, just that little topic. So I first thing I want to say is like this is something I've learned more and more as I've been in this world, is that musical theater isn't a style. Okay. Right? It's a medium. It's a form, and it contains within it a bunch of different styles. Now, because of course, there's everything from Golden Age musical theater to also like modern musicals that sort of emulate that style, like Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, which kind of feels like an operetta. And then you have, musicals written by Green Day, and you have incredibly text-dense stuff that almost feels, quasi-classical, like some of the Sondheim stuff. There's a huge range, and the way you sing those things is different. But I think the biggest difference and the biggest thing that it took me a while to really fully absorb the ramifications of this is it's the difference between microphone-based singing and acoustic singing. And understanding that is a really fundamental difference. It's not just a volume thing. It's a total reorganizing of your priorities. And
sure, yeah.
And so I'd say that's thing number one. And I think number two is it's singing where the intention is for the voice to be an instrument versus for the voice to be an extension of vernacular speech. And those are sort of our two jumping off points. I think basically everything kind of is downstream of that.
Okay, yeah.
I love that, because I think that, with this idea of a student starting a voice degree, right? If they had talent in high school, and like you mentioned, right, all these high schools usually do musicals. I don't know any high schools doing operas. So the majority of, my first role ever on stage was Cinderella's Prince and the Wolf and Into the Woods, right? That's what got my interest peaked into singing on stage, at least. And so you go into these vocal performance programs, and you find yourself either at a place that does, a musical and an opera, or only opera. It just depends on the school and what the program is. But I think nowadays, as we approach, sort of where we are in 2025, post-COVID, maybe we should say, I think it's incredibly important for young singers to learn a varied approach to singing that would be inclusive of a classical operatic style. And to your point, right? You're talking about Golden Age, you're talking about probably Rent. Would you disagree or agree? Would Rent be the first thing that came along in the canon where it was like, oh wow, this is a different kind of singing for musical up until that point? Or
I think that that's definitely one of the big crossroads. But you go back and you have things like Jesus Christ Superstar, you have Tommy, you have Hair.
Sure.
But I think definitely Rent was another one of those major sort of seismic shifts.
Because we're over in the classical side, we're expected to be able to sing, German lieder, French melody, Italian art song, and then oratorio, which might have like Handel stuff that's super melismatic, or Puccini and Verdi. You know what I mean? Like there's such a huge span. It's similar-ish to like what you're talking about: Golden Age, Sondheim, Green Day, whatever. You know, it's like having that varied approach to it. But my point is like, how do we do that? How do we? Let's talk a little bit about some of the technical differences in approach that you would teach one student, right? And is there an overall arching goal in your mind? Like, no matter what we're singing, we want to make sure that we always what?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the sort of the foundational like sound in musical theater is mix. This idea of mix, which is not a register, it's sort of an approach. If you ask, 3 people, you'll hear 4 definitions. But like, my favorite way to think about mix is the quality of speech on any pitch. And there's lots of ways to accomplish that, right? We can parse that, in terms of like registration. How, chesty or heady, or mode 1, mode 2, however you like to talk about it. You can talk about it in terms of loftiness. You can talk about it in terms of, buzzing to calling. There's lots of ways we organize it. But I think learning to have someone be able to use their speaking voice and have it bridge into their singing voice. So it really, those two things feel like the same voice. So I'd say if someone comes in and they're not able to use their speaking voice expressively, that's where we have to start. So before we even, get into this thing where we have specific notes, we have the challenge that, a rangy piece gives us, or a belting piece, or anything else. We have to first be able to accomplish speaking expressively and also precisely. So a really great exercise that I use a lot of times to people is you'll take a piece. I know Norman Spivey, who's the co-author of Cross Training the Voice Studio with Mary Saunders Barton. They both were out of Penn State. Goes through these steps in their book. First having people deliver the song as a monologue, then delivering it in rhythm, and then delivering it as a monologue, but sort of charting the contour of the pitches. So when the notes go up, your speaking voice goes up. When the notes go down, your speaking voice goes down, but keep it speech.
This is amazing because Weston and I were literally having this same conversation this morning.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. I've never read that book, but we do the same thing. It's great. It's great.
Well, it brings to mind what we said earlier about Stephen King saying, I'm not saying anything I haven't said before. I can show you in this book over here. And that's, I don't say that to make light of any of this, but I mean, it is true that there are still books coming out, and there are different ways to approach and ideas and stuff. But what's the original thought, right?
Right.
What's left to explore? I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that, but I have one more burning question that I want to ask you when you're ready to answer.
Cool. Let me just layer one more thing on top of that.
Sure.
Which is the difference between formal speech and vernacular speech, because I think that's a really important element of this, right? So, if you think about kind of classic, singer voice, or voice teacher voice, it sounds that way because you're maintaining a stable laryngeal position, or maintaining a fairly stable internal space. But we don't typically do that when we speak. So unless
you're weird. Hey, how are you? Well, one of the best stories ever, Giorgio Tozzi, right? One of the most recorded basses in history. He would speak, "Well, hello there. How you doing? Come on in." Yeah. And he just always talked like this. But most people don't.
Yeah, totally. And so when we talk about playing a character, trying to bring a character through the singing, it means that when we sing in most vernacular styles, we're not going to have as stable a laryngeal position as you do in classical singing. And again, one of the big uses of keeping a stable laryngeal position is that you have a more stable sort of singing space, vocal tract, and so the accumulation of sound is greater, and so it's acoustically louder. But we go back to the idea of singing on a microphone. And it's more important that we capture the quality of speech than that it is any particular volume level. Like, there's not that same barrier of having to clear an orchestra. And so it opens up a lot of less formal colors that we then get to play with.
So as somebody who's never really taught serious musical theater technique, how do you utilize that in the studio? I mean, you're obviously not teaching someone who's standing in front of you on a mic, right? They're actually in front of you, not mic'd. So how do you teach that microphone technique?
So first of all, I would heartily recommend you bring a mic into the studio. I think that's part of it. Just take a standard, my SM58, microphone, plug it into a portable speaker, and have it on a mic stand, and let the person experience what that's like. I think that's a valuable skill. There's also little tools you can use to kind of simulate some of those things. But I'd say the biggest deal is part of your responsibility is, as the teacher, to kind of keep in mind that as someone continues to sing, as sound accumulates in the room, all of our tendency is for things to get louder and louder and louder. And a question I ask students a lot, and I ask myself, is, would it be any worse if it was a little softer? Would we lose anything if it was 10% less?
And is that in an attempt to keep the voice healthy, save the energy, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
so that
totally.
they're not pushing so much on
So
it?
that's
Eight,
one.
9 shows.
Yeah,
a week.
8 shows a week, and it's absolutely, and that's a big piece of it. There's also a thing called constructive interference. This gets really in the weeds, but I'll try to keep it, as user friendly as possible. Which is basically the more activity that's happening in terms of volume, in terms of numbers of sound waves, intensity, of fundamental frequency, the more that you don't hear other sounds that aren't part of that boosted frequency. So basically, a classical sound sounds that way because there's a whole lot of energy that's being organized, and it kind of organizes itself into a classical sound. When you bring back the intensity, you don't get that same amount of constructive interference, and you start to hear these other noises. It's one reason why you can hear a lot of rasp in very quiet singing, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong. And in fact, if you go and the metal singers I've worked with don't tend to be the softest singers.
You mean like heavy metal music?
Yeah.
Wow.
Really soft.
Soft as far as like in the room.
Yes. If you're physically standing with them in the room, there's very little volume coming from most of them.
That's amazing, because of course what we hear is the final product on a
Scream.
Yeah, faders are amazing.
Okay, so last question, and this is something we're going to get into in our next season. But it's how did you know who was going to be the right teacher for you when you were switching and learning the musical theater technique? Because there are lots of different ideas and philosophies of singing in classical teaching, and I'm sure there's that, if not more, in musical theater. So how did you know which teacher to go to kind of bridge this gap?
So this is a bit of an embarrassing part of my history, which is that it took me a while to start studying privately in musical theater voice. Most of my continuing education came because I was lucky enough to be part of Voice Pedagogy Institute from its very first year, 11 years ago. And every year, one of my responsibilities was bringing in the musical theater teacher. So I would identify, and so I just asked people I wanted to see work. And so I would bring in, kind of a lot of the who's who of New York-based and also around the rest of the country, musical theater voice teachers. And so I would get to observe and chat with them and talk, and then I would keep up a relationship, and I would ask questions, and I would get into that with them. I also would invite my friends who were on Broadway and have them come and do workshops with my students. And so a lot of my initial training with this stuff was me continuing to study on my own, classically, but then a lot of the musical theater stuff I was getting by observing and by hearing some of those folks. But when I
love it. I mean, super shrewd, to be able to do that. I mean, I think I wish when I was switching teachers any of the time that I would have taken, other than just hearing a reputation and that's the person you should go with, like, could you imagine Weston me asking Steve Smith for a trial lesson? He would laugh at me. He's like, you either want to study with me or you don't. Bill Schumann, the same thing. You're going to ask him for a trial lesson? That's like, come on, it's Bill Schumann. If he takes you, you go, now.
Right.
But that's it's so shrewd, and it's so I think it's served you really, really well.
Thanks,
so
man.
That's awesome. I don't know.
Yeah, I do want to plug real quick that when I decided I wanted to get this crossover concert together, that was when I was like, I should probably actually get in the studio with somebody. And I coached with lots of people who play on Broadway and things like that, through some of this repertoire. But I was teaching in my studio, and the guy who was teaching next door to me was Jared Trudeau, who is a product of the Penn State program and teaches a lot of different folks on Broadway. And I just went next door and asked him if we could do some lessons. And we've been working together since 2022, I think. And we prepped the crossover concert together, and he's super excellent. But that was really most helpful when it really came to putting my own singing in this world together. And but really, there's no replacement for getting to have the exposure to all of those different teachers and getting to see what they did differently, and also kind of trying to understand what were they each going for, and who was most effective at what kind of thing. So I highly recommend, if you can just get in the room with a lot of different people, you don't necessarily have to be the one taking the lesson.
Right. Well, John, we thank you so much for this. It's been really, I know we could go for another hour, but we're going to
we typically do.
We're going to keep it concise. We typically do. But we thank you, Weston, and I thank you so much. And, join us next week, everybody. John will be back, and we'll be talking with his wife, Isabella Lamadriz, about her Cuban art song project, which is going to be super fun. We're going to show some videos. So join us next week. It's going to be our last episode of the season.
The finale of season 1. Can you believe it?
Go. The episode 20. I can't believe we've got these in the can. But thank you all for listening, and thank you, John, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week, okay?
Thank you guys so much. This was so fun.
All right, see you soon.
See you, man.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on Between the Notes. Make sure you hit that subscribe button.
And join us next week for more behind-the-scenes stories, laughs, and operatic gold coming your way.